Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I'm having a part two of a research piece I'm titling Patty Hearst Mind Control in the MK Rogues Gallery. The last one, the first one, part one, concluded with a talk or part I read from Revolution's End by Brad Shriver, and it ended with Colston Westbrook. And if you're watching this one, part two, on X or Rockfin, you'll see this is a video I'm going to play of Colston Westbrook sitting with famous author, African-American author, James Baldwin. So I'll play this. Hopefully the audio will play.
All right, as I told you before, when we had various quotes and things, that Mr. Baldwin will be here, and simply what we'll do is have a straight question and answer period, Q&A, and I'll try to repeat the question as much as possible so that in case any people can't hear it, and we'll just get to it. So I'll just try to moderate and point out and get some people, whoever wants to ask questions. Okay, let's get to it.
So if you listen to the last talk, Westbrook was involved in the Phoenix program, Vietnam, and then kind of handled Cinque Mfume, the Fifth Prophet, aka Donald DeFreeze. And so today I'm going to kind of go over some of the old pictures that I had before, just kind of a recap. This is the arrest record of Patricia Campbell Hearst, her in her SLA garb, shooting up the Hibernia Bank with Donald DeFreeze. Wanted pictures of the SLA members, Donald DeFreeze, being taken to court. I think she's 18, young, private investigator. So we're going to talk. I'm going to have a book by Lake Headley, who did an independent investigation. He was hired by Willie Wolf, who was an SLA member, I believe died, but he was hired by the family to investigate what really went on with SLA. So I'm going to read a chapter from his book. And I mentioned his book last time. But here's the cover for Revolution's End. Highly recommend this, with a statement by David Talbot. I'm also going to read a little bit from Donald T. Lund, who ties into some very interesting people and very interesting friends. Memoir of a Forensic Psychiatrist. This is the book I just mentioned, Vegas PI, Life and Times of America's Greatest Detective, Lake Headley. He worked on a number of cases. Wounded Knee, which is about Native Americans. There was a bombing in Arizona he worked on, of a guy who was an investigative reporter who got his car blown up. So he was involved in a lot of that stuff. And you can see a blurb there from Vincent Bugliosi, the best private investigator on earth. And then the books we're going to read from, she did two books, Patricia Campbell Hearst. The first one was Every Secret Thing, and then the second one was her own story. That's the most recent one, 1988. So we're going to read from that. And this is all over the news. I showed these pictures last time, but again, just to recap, there's West with Bailey, Orne, Singer, and Lipton. And there's even more than those people. There's like Kozol, Lund was involved. There's just so many people. And just to recap, Bailey was friends with William Joseph Bryan and went to his classes, right? So he had a literal certificate from William Joseph Bryan for hypnotism. So here they are again. This is something I screenshotted from social media. Here they are again. This is what Jolly and West looked like. This is 74, 75. That's Lipton, West, and Orne. And then this is kind of the interesting thing where one of the journalists, I think I've talked about Paul Krasner in regards to what Kubrick was reading. He was a friend of Krasner's work, but Krasner, people did some research, and I think it'll come out here in the Lake Headley book, is that Hearst was in trouble with her family because she had left-wing sympathies. She was from a super rich family, obviously. Hearst Castle, etc. Hearst Publishing, which is still huge today. But they think she impersonated this person. So you see the picture of Mary Alice Seam and Theroux Wheeler, right? and that's Hearst below her. They're almost exact replicas. I don't know if Hearst stole her idea, but somebody found out that Seam wasn't even at Berkeley when Hearst was. So it's clear that she couldn't have been the one going to the Vacaville prison, right? And so this Lake Headley discovered that she was at the Vacaville prison with Colston Westbrook and Cinque, aka Donald DeFries. And that's Thera Wheeler. Mary Alice doesn't live here before. And just to read, this is an article, but based upon the research, it is. Let's see. When Willie Wolf's father heard that his son had got mixed up in a band of paramilitary left-wing yahoos, he couldn't believe it. So he hired Lake Headley, a top-notch private investigator, to find out what the hell Willie was doing. On May 4th, 1974, 13 days before the younger Wolf's death at the hands of the LAPD, Headley concluded his investigation, right? So the SLA was blown up and 6 people died in a so-called safe house in South LA, and filed a sworn affidavit of his findings. It's 400 pages. I haven't found it yet, but if anybody has 400 pages of Headley's work or knows where to find it, please let me know. In the quaint language of legal mumbo jumbo, he found, more like came to the opinion, but that's legal mumbo jumbo for you, that the SLA was, in fact, an ongoing domestic operation of the CIA. He further found, quote, that Patricia Campbell Hearst and her parents disagreed bitterly over Patricia's political and personal relations, that a love affair between a black man and Patricia Hearst did take place prior to her relationship with her fiancé, Stephen Weed. That's who she was with when she was abducted in Berkeley. That Miss Randolph A. Hearst subjected her daughter to extreme pressure to change her personal and political relationships. So that's her mom. So it wasn't kind of some kind of big happy family. So I'm going to read first from, this will overlap, the information will overlap, but I think it's important to see kind of what people found from different perspectives. So I'm going to read from chapter 8 of Lake Headley, who I just mentioned. I'm going to read from his inquiry and research into the SLA, kind of at first blush, really, in 1974. He's unfortunately passed away. He died of Lou Gehrig's disease. And then I will read kind of really what the theme of this talk was intended to be, which is the MK Rogues Gallery from Patricia Campbell Hearst's book, Every Secret Thing, or my memoirs or my story. Chapter 8, the SLA. The weather was cold the night of February 4th, 1974, in the university town of Berkeley, the cradle of the modern American protest movement. 19-year-old Patricia Campbell Hearst and her lover, Stephen Andrew Weed, 26, felt warm and secure in their handsome $250 a month apartment. They heard a tapping at the duplex window, and Weed rose in response. The Princeton University graduate peered out through the glass at a shabbily dressed young white woman. "Hi," the woman said. "Something's wrong with my car. Can I use your phone?" "Well, I don't know, you see." 2 black men dressed in commando gear materialized out of the darkness, smashed rifle butts through the glass door, drove Weed to the floor. Hearing the noise, a man from next door rushed in. The attackers beat Weed and the neighbor unconscious with a wine bottle. Weed was knocked out perhaps 30 seconds. Then he lurched toward the apartment door while the kidnappers were occupied with their struggling victim, and he ran for help. The commando unit dragged the screaming Miss Hearst toward a waiting getaway car. The abductors fired bursts of gunfire from their automatic weapons at alarmed neighbors who had crowded the doors and windows of adjacent apartments. The neighbors took cover, but most of them saw Patty Hearst stuffed into the trunk of the getaway car. 10 weeks later, Patty's voice was heard on a taped communique sent by her abductors, the terrorist Symbionese Liberation Army. Quote, "I have chosen to stay and fight with my comrades. My name is now Tanya," unquote. Accompanying the terrible tape message was the now famous color photograph of Patty Tanya dressed in gorilla costume and holding a Chinese AK-47 automatic weapon. Behind her hung a banner picturing a 7-headed cobra, the symbol of the SLA. The name Tanya was associated with a woman who had loved and died with Che Guevara in the jungles of Bolivia. The kidnapping of Patty Hearst crowded other important stories off the front pages of the nation's newspapers. Who could resist such a story? It was the first political kidnapping ever engineered inside this country. Sensation built upon sensation. There were fiery pronunciamentos from SLA Field Marshal Cinque, Donald David DeFries, and he quickly proved himself more than just a man of words. He forced Patty's father, the fabulously wealthy Randolph A. Hearst, to distribute more than $1 million in food to needy residents of Oakland. Despite then Governor Reagan's statement, the people of Oakland are too proud to accept a handout, tens of thousands showed up to receive free turkeys. Then Cinque's band pulled a daring armed robbery of the Hibernia branch of the Bank of America. Photographed participating in the robbery was Patty Hearst. She became a hero to many on the left. I didn't know what to think. Were these revolutionary Robin Hood stealing from the rich to feed the poor? Then I got a call from the outstanding activist author Donald Fried, co-author of Executive Action, among many other works. And soon I was up to my ears in a story truly stranger than fiction. What do you think of DeFries? Fried asked. Cinque, he has a certain panache, I guess. He's a police agent, Fried said. I let that roll around in my head for a while. We'd like you to look into this kidnapping, Fried continued. Who's we? Hidley responded. It turned out to be a group called the Citizens Research and Investigation Committee. I was impressed by some of the names Fried mentioned and agreed to meet with these people. One of them, an ex-cop named Danny Stewart, repeated what Fried had said. This guy, Cinque, is a police agent. Call him an agent provocateur if you want. Whatever, he's no revolutionary like the cops and press want us to believe. The date was May 2nd, 1974, and though my pay would be zero, I agreed to head the investigation the Citizens Research Committee had begun. I had lots of energy that had carried over from the bracing experiences at Wounded Knee, and maybe there was something here. After recruiting 2 veterans of Wounded Knee, Elizabeth Schmidt and Jeannie Davies, we went quite right to work. What we quickly learned, and most of it came from public records, painted an unmistakable picture. In 1964, 10 years before the Hearst kidnapping, DeFries had been a police informant, ratting on friends and associates. This information came from sources I had inside the LAPD, but it wouldn't have taken even the most dense PI long to figure it out. We looked at Cinque's arrest record. 3/31/65, West Covina, California. DeFries arrested with bomb, knife, and sawed-off shotgun. Probation. DeFries continued as an occasional informant to the LAPD on the sales of contraband and stolen arms. 6/9/67, robbery charge, 2 counts possession of explosives, 1 count possession of concealed weapon, 2 bombs and a gun. Probation. DeFries, already on probation, now received 3 more years on probation despite his violation. On December 2nd, 1967, DeFries was arrested for the 5th time on an arms charge. He had robbed and beaten a prostitute. He was driven to the 77th Street station by arresting officers Tolles and Farwell, but he escaped when they were en route. He was recaptured shortly afterward, but not charged with anything. On December 6, 1967, DeFries set up his partner, Ron, by telephoning, then leading police to Ron's apartment. There, a cache of 200 weapons belonging to Ron and DeFries were found. These weapons had come from a surplus store, one among several that had been robbed to supply guns to a black cultural nationalist organization. DeFries, evidently a reincarnation of Houdini, escaped once again. When he was recaptured, he was given 5 more years of probation. How could this be possible? Ask any police officer, and I used to be one, and you'll be told Cinque was somebody's snitch. An out-of-control snitch, no doubt, but a snitch nonetheless. Somebody wanted him out on the street. If allowing a prostitute to be beaten and robbed was the price, someone was willing to pay it. Any of the arrests we uncovered in normal practice would have remanded DeFries to the penitentiary for parole violation. I came to believe that during this period, December 1967, Donald David DeFries was a certain Los Angeles police detective's informant on black liberation politics. Why did I think this? I called the detective and he implied as much. Unknown to him, I tape recorded our conversation May 2nd, 1974, which featured the following line, quote, I am reluctant to say anything because the guy he is going to be killed, unquote. DeFries joined a stable of black agents recruited after the Watts uprising that worked out of the black desk of LAPD intelligence. DeFries' main activity was to report on black militant activity in South Central Los Angeles. This only months after DeFries had been discovered to have a supply of 200 guns, including automatic weapons. In an event I thought was related, on May 2nd, 1967, California law enforcement was thrown into an official uproar when a delegation from the Black Panther Party legally demonstrated at the Sacramento State House by carrying unloaded guns inside the legislature to protest a piece of pending legislation. DeFreeze, an ex-con with 200 guns, was given very low bail later probation. In 1968, DeFreeze was arrested armed for the 6th time burglary. Released, no charge. Sounds like Manson. DeFreeze was being run in the ever-mounting campaign against the fast-growing Southern California chapter of the Black Panther Party. At the same time, DeFreeze was allowed to ply his arms trade for profit. DeFreeze was arrested again in August 1968, grand larceny. 9 days later, DeFreeze's wife wrote the authorities, reminding them that her husband's occasional work for them and the protection that the couple had been promised by the police. DeFreeze was released again. During the early fall of 1968, the LAPD detective and his agents, including DeFreeze, became part of a new subversive super-secret unit, the Criminal Conspiracy Section, CCS. DeFreeze's job involved moving guns and grenades to be used against the Black Panther Party. Despite every indication of his instability, DeFreeze, on December 13, 1968, was given 5 years probation on the 200-gun charge. The staff opinion from DeFreeze's psychiatric report was that his constant involvement with firearms and explosives made him dangerous. Disregarding every indication of danger, the Criminal Conspiracy Section put DeFreeze back on the streets into an extremely volatile political situation developing in Los Angeles. In December 1968, the Black Panther Party leaders John Huggins and Al Prentice Bunchy Carter were gunned down on the campus of UCLA with guns that I suspected but cannot prove had come from DeFreeze. April 1969, unlawful possession of a dangerous weapon. So that's kind of another. Thus, DeFreeze was arrested for a 7th time for an armed offense that carried both state and federal charges. But DeFreeze told the judge that he had registered the gun with the police under his own name, and that the gun was actually intended for a police officer friend. DeFreeze was charged with burglary at this same time in April 1969. Despite consistent and massive violations of his probation, despite demands from New Jersey, where he's also wanted to hold him, DeFreeze instead was provided medical help by the Criminal Conspiracy Section. During this period, I learned he threatened CCS with exposure unless they came to his aid. That DeFreeze got released again was unprecedented, according to law enforcement experts I interviewed. DeFreeze went to New Jersey. May 69, Newark, New Jersey. DeFreeze and another man posing as Black Panthers were accused of assaulting an employee of a Jewish synagogue with a shotgun, demanding $5,000 in information and aid in a scheme to kidnap a well-known Newark Jewish rights leader. Upon completion of the kidnapping, DeFreeze's plan was to submit a ransom communique purporting to be from the Black Panther Party. Yeah, so there's a lot of background before the SLA. DeFreeze escaped authorities in Newark, crossed state lines in violation once again of federal law, and in October of 1969 surfaced in Cleveland, Ohio. October 69, Cleveland. DeFreeze appeared on the roof of Cleveland Trust Company Branch Bank with a .38 revolver, 25 caliber pistol, an 8-inch dagger, a toolkit, and in violation of federal law, a hand grenade. Cleveland police had, in this period, been on extreme alert because of the Ahmed Evans affair, black militants involved in an ambush and shootout with police. Yet DeFreeze was released on a very low bail, $5,000, and charges were later dropped. DeFreeze was wanted at this time on a capital charge in New Jersey, as well as for probation violation in California, but he was not held in Cleveland. DeFreeze fled back to California, and only days later, while high on pills, his own admission, he robbed a woman at gunpoint of a $1,000 check and, using false identification, tried to cash the check at Bank of America branch. November 69, DeFreeze exchanged gunshots with a bank guard and was wounded. The gun used in the shootout was a .32 caliber Beretta automatic pistol. This gun was still another gun left over from the earlier 1967 200-gun robbery. DeFreeze had obviously been allowed to keep a number of guns from this cache. On December 3rd, 1969, DeFreeze was ordered imprisoned at Vacaville, California medical facility. Over a period of 18 months, he wrote long letters to the sentencing judge in his case detailing his problems and his fanatical Christian religious convictions. According to DeFreeze, in 1970 at Vacaville, he was recruited by an alleged CIA operative, Colston Westbrook, we just saw him at the beginning, to lead a behavior modification experimental unit entitled the Black Cultural Association. I'll repeat that sentence again. The Behavior Modification Experimental Unit entitled the Black Cultural Association. Right, that's what happened to Patty Hearst, behavior modification. At this time, on orders from Westbrook, DeFries publicly espoused a militant anti-white cultural nationalist ideology. His private letters during the same period were saturated with Christian theology. The Black Cultural Association, DeFries said, attracted outside prison reform support during this period, and DeFries began operating as a double agent, one for Westbrook and the CIA, and two for the California Department of Corrections and the Bureau of Criminal Intelligence and Investigation, CII, responsible to the Attorney General of California. On May 10th, 1974, I knew enough about Cinque to be pretty sure of what lay in his immediate future. With our committee's approval, I called a remarkably well-attended press conference. The Los Angeles Times and San Francisco Chronicle were there, among others, and ran down Cinque's past. I ended with a prediction that, quote, he'll be killed, probably in a shootout, unquote. I never doubted that sooner or later, more likely sooner, Cinque would be murdered. He could not be allowed to live, any more than Lee Harvey Oswald could be allowed to survive and start talking. I take no satisfaction in ultimately being right. On May 7th, that's a week later, 1974, Angelenos, myself, including myself, sitting down to enjoy Friday dinner, instead sat transfixed in horror at the shootout being brought live into our homes via TV. 6 people died in flaming wreckage of that house at 1466 East 54th Street. Cinque, Angela Atwood, Nancy Ling Perry, Patricia Solitzik, Camilla Hall, and Willie Wolfe. Elizabeth Schmidt, Gene Davies, and I now had to split up the scope of our investigation. Previously, we had concentrated on DeFries' bizarre history, but the killings on 54th Street meant we'd have to broaden our focus. We agreed that Elizabeth and Jeannie, 2 attractive white women, would probably be more effective as on-scene investigators, interviewing witnesses and checking out the scene of the slaughter. I'd resume my search on Cinque. Using contacts in the California radical community, I was able to interview Vacaville prisoners familiar with DeFries and the mysterious Colston Westbrook. These inmates told me that DeFries had seemingly broken with Westbrook and the Black Cultural Association over matters of policy, and DeFries had then gone to Department of Corrections authorities to complain about the BCA. Other inmates in the Black Cultural Association had charged that DeFries was unacceptable to them because of his extremely provocative and ultra-militant positions. Authorities at Vacaville, however, had not found him unacceptable and proceeded to set him up with his own outside project. This project, named Unisight, was supposedly concerned with problems of the families of Black prisoners. In reality, Unisight was an organizing magnet for white radicals in the prison movement. Ultimately, Unisight became the Symbionese Liberation Army. In December 1972, DeFries had been transferred to the maximum security prison of Soledad in order to inform and entrap Black militants incarcerated in that facility. I located a Soledad inmate who gave the following sworn statement, quote, "When Donald DeFries was here, I had a few conversations with him. I have always questioned his departure as being a simple walk away. I didn't come into contact with him personally until his last couple of weeks here. There weren't many who would be associated with him. He tried to give the impression of being super cool, and he came across as cold. When I met him, he was working in the maintenance shop. I asked him if he was happy on his job, because if not, I might be able to find him something else. He replied that within a few days he was going to be assigned to work in the boiler room of the South facility. I questioned that because he didn't have enough time here to be given that trust. I know cons that have been turned down for that position. He wouldn't comment. He only gave me a big smile. I should explain that no prisoners were kept at the South facility at that time because it had no security. No gun towers were in operation and there were no guards posted. A few prisoners with proven records of trust were taken from the Central facility to the South facility to perform certain duties. Then they would be returned to Central after their shift. A few days later, DeFries did get that job. Midnight to 8 a.m. shift in the boiler room at South facility. On his first night, he was dropped off at midnight and given a few instructions. His job was automatic. It only required an overseer. He was then left to himself, and when an officer returned an hour later to check on him, he was gone." Unquote. I learned that the South facility of Soledad, only for trusted inmates, is a holding section for informers. DeFries, quote, escaped, unquote, from Soledad on March 5th, 1973, and moved underground in white circles in the Bay Area. Then in November 1973, he was involved in the assassination of Oakland school superintendent Dr. Marcus Foster. This killing came just after Dr. Foster had acceded to reform demands made by the Oakland black community and the Black Panther Party. The next time the world heard of DeFreeze, he'd taken the name Sin K and kidnapped Patty Hearst. Maybe his adopted name was appropriate because the actual Sin K, an African Mendi chief from the 1830s, had two faces. The first acquired when he led a rebellion on a slave ship, the second when he himself became a slave trader. About this time, my son, Lake III, age 22, moved from Las Vegas to Los Angeles and joined the investigation. From then on, he was with me for parts or all of every case I handled. Plenty was happening on my end of the SLA probe, digging into DeFreeze's police agent history, and Elizabeth and Jeannie were unearthing nuggets on their end. According to the official version of the shootout, 6 suicidal fanatics of the Symbionese Liberation Army had attacked the Los Angeles Police Department, thus precipitating the bloody confrontation. In reality, the SLA suspects fired fewer than 50 rounds against the some 5,000 incoming, and the police fired first. Millions of taxpayer dollars spent, destruction of property, loss of life, a black community under fire. This resulted from the decision-making chain headed by Police Chief Edward Davis. Let's look at the facts. On May 10th, many people Jeannie and Elizabeth interviewed in the vicinity of what was to become known as the Death House said they were aware that important visitors would soon be arriving. This completely contradicted the official story that the house was rented at random one day before the police raid. At no time did the FBI or LAPD honor their oft-made and well-publicized promises to alert the families of SLA members to stand by to attempt to talk suspects out of a bloody confrontation. 3 of the suspects' families were less than an hour away from their homes in California. Instead, as the Los Angeles Times reported the next day, a police officer dropped to one knee almost directly in front of the yellow stucco bungalow at 1466 and fired a tear gas round through the front window. Then he scrambled to his feet and ran for his life. As soon as he's out of the way, the scores of policemen and FBI agents started pouring bullets into the house. Police claimed 9,000 rounds of bullets were exchanged, 4,000 fired by the SLA. Jeannie and Elizabeth, after the most careful on-site investigation, believed the official report was correct in one respect. The cops fired 5,000 rounds. The SLA, however, fired perhaps 50. No officer was hit, by the way, a virtually impossible result if 4,000 rounds had been fired. So much was wrong with the official version. Police said communication was difficult between themselves and the terrorists, yet our investigation found that there was a working telephone in the death house. Couldn't the cops, as per normal procedure, have begun negotiations with the trapped fugitives? I don't believe they wanted to negotiate. Donald DeFreeze talking to the press would have unleashed a scandal even the government couldn't have contained. But let's stick to the facts. The LAPD said it repeatedly asked the fugitives to come out of that house, to surrender. What the police didn't reveal is that the SLA tried to comply. Nancy Ling Perry, Angela Atwood, and Camilla Hall all attempted to come out and were driven back inside by a hail of bullets. I personally visited Coroner Thomas Noguchi after the so-called shootout. The model for the TV series Quincy, this role was played by Jack Klugman. Great show. In one of the world's most respected pathologists, Dr. Noguchi told me that Nancy Ling Perry had died in the backyard of 1466. She'd been shot in the back as she tried to flee from the very people who had urged her to come out. I asked Noguchi if she had been armed. He said no. How much warning had police given the SLA? 15 minutes, said a LAPD spokesman. But Newsweek magazine reported that moments after one warning was issued, the police fired tear gas. Puzzled police officials talked a good deal about the mysterious start of the fire that raged unchecked at 1466. There should have been no mystery at all. The police had used flight-right projectiles, and the manufacturer's own manual, which we obtained, plainly warned of the danger of fire when these weapons are employed. The police assault began at 5:53 p.m., and Elizabeth and Jeannie estimated that all the SLA members were dead by 6:20. The house had become an inferno, and no one inside was returning fire. Firefighting personnel and equipment had arrived on the scene, but the firefighters were not allowed to approach the blaze for 30 minutes, despite a clear danger that it could spread. While there was some evidence of ammunition exploding inside the house, The bullets posed no threat to the firefighters who had the capability to put out the flames from a distance. Police continued to pour gunfire into the house throughout the conflagration. Some of them, we later learned, had been whipped into a fury by a superior, telling them that Sin-Kay had murdered, a few days earlier, Officer Michael Lee Edwards, whose body had been found in the vicinity. I later learned that the same inflammatory technique was used in the police raid and killings of Black Panther leaders Fred Hampton and Mark Clark in 1969. Elizabeth and Jeannie interviewed several firefighters who said they had wanted to battle the blaze, but had been threatened with arrest when they started to try. Elizabeth and Jeannie talked to virtually every resident in a 4-square block area. The upshot: every person with knowledge of the shootout said the cops fired first. So much for the idea floated by authorities that romantic SLA members had a death wish and wanted to go out in a blaze of glory. I thought the investigation conducted by Jeannie and Elizabeth would show conclusively to any fair-minded individual that the government didn't want anyone coming out of that house alive. Meanwhile, my own area of specialty, I believed, was producing equally startling conclusions. In its December-January 1975-76 issue, Argosy magazine writer Dick Russell, after studying our investigation, wrote, "The history of the SLA begins with one-time CIA employee named Colston Westbrook, a burly, fast-talking 36-year-old specialist in Black English now teaching at the University of California, Berkeley." I read that one on the intro. In early 1966, Westbrook was hired as a personnel administrator by a civilian firm, Pacific Architects and Engineers Incorporated of Los Angeles, which was operating out of South Vietnam. According to Washington intelligence sources, Pacific Architects was a subsidiary of the Pacific Corporation, a multinational consortium headquartered in Delaware and wholly owned by the Central Intelligence Agency. It's kind of a repeat. Pacific Architects provided logistical support for the CIA's Phoenix program, whose goal was assassinating so-called Viet Cong sympathizers. Colston Westbrook's returned from Vietnam at the same time the CIA launched a new program called Chaos. In June 1975, a report to the president by the Commission on CIA Activities within the United States identified one of the goals of Chaos: acquiring assets in the peace and Black Power movements in the United States, and went on to say, individuals without existing dissident affiliation would be recruited, and after recruitment, would acquire the theory and jargon and make acquaintances in the new left while attending school. The purpose was to spy on anti-war groups. Forget that it was illegal. The CIA's charter forbade it from participating in domestic operations. Colston Westbrook came from Vietnam to work as a tutor to the Black Cultural Association at Vacaville. At the prison, he met the police snitch Donald DeFries. It was Westbrook who introduced the future Sin-Kay to Willie Wolfe. When DeFries left the BCA, he formed Unisight, which became the SLA, and a little more than a year later, quote, escaped, unquote, from a low-security section of Soledad, where he'd been transferred. At Soledad, DeFries renewed acquaintance with General Kahn. They had known each other since 1968. Kahn was DeFries' right-hand man at Soledad, and when DeFries died in that flaming house, Kahn took over the SLA's new field marshal. One of our committee's investigators, Rusty Rhodes, located General Kahn. Don said he wanted to hit Hearst, General Kahn told Rhodes, for the recognition that would be involved. He said he wanted to see her beaten and broken to the lowest thing on earth, lower than even himself. We discussed the complete plan of action early in 1973. It was obvious Don was going to split Soledad and that he had a lot of help. He would set up a safe houses in Berkeley, and once that was done, I would get word and lead the second wave out. There were 8 of us who would escape and make our way to San Francisco, and we'd all meet Don at a flop house next to the Greyhound bus station. Don and his group would snatch Patty. The second wave, my command, would grab the 2 younger Hearst girls. Both commands would then set up in the area, but I'd go to Colorado and find a place. So why did it happen that way? I caught DeFries and a lieutenant talking in the custody room, Kahn said. They were discussing the SLA when the lieutenant saw me and ordered me into the recreation yard. DeFries told the lieutenant, "No, let him stay. He knows everything. He's the second man." So then the lieutenant looked at me and told me I was going to escape. I didn't trust him. I quietly started warning some of my people that the Department of Corrections knew our plans. If I was right, it was more than the Department of Corrections that knew the plans. I believed the CIA, through its chaos operation, was deeply involved. Why? The CIA doesn't tell me why it does things like hire my old pal, Johnny Rosselli, to kill Fidel Castro. So he's this guy, Lake Headley, is friends with Johnny Rosselli, who I just had that discussion with Meyer about mafia spies, which is coming out. Really good book. Recommend that. Let me get back. Why? The CIA doesn't tell me why it does things like hire my old pal, Johnny Rosselli, to kill Fidel Castro, but I could guess it had something to do with discrediting the left in the eyes of the middle class, becoming increasingly disenchanted with the Vietnam War. At the least, the CIA had lost control of the monster it had created illegally. And yes, Sin K was a monster, a rapist. He raped Patty Hearst, a murderer. He helped kill Marcus Foster. Snitch, bank robber, gun runner, dope peddler, mugger, you name it. That was Sin K. In his rantings, he even called for the murders of Angela Davis and Huey Newton. He wanted the entire movement to follow him. The whole scenario Kahn had talked about soon resurfaced in our investigation. It came about when the enterprising Rusty Rhodes interviewed inmate Robert Hyde, a jailhouse lawyer who actually had practiced law in California courts. The California Department of Correction, Hyde told Rhodes, approached me about a deal to recruit snitches in 1971. They wanted me to enlarge my legal assistance efforts to include all races and organizations inside the prison so I could bring them tips. At first I refused, but their goon squad beat me and threw me into isolation. I stayed there for 7 months. I knew I couldn't get out alive unless I made a deal, so I agreed. In late 1971, I was ordered to begin recruiting inmates for a new organization called the Symbionese Liberation Army. I was very successful. I recruited 100 or more SLA members. When I became suspicious of all this recruitment, I got word to the FBI in San Francisco. It didn't respond, but in early 1972, a Secret Service agent named Miller came in to see me, and I gave him all the information I had. Hyde couldn't explain why the Secret Service had come. No, he wasn't mistaken. Miller said he was Secret Service. In late 1973, with Sin K now head of the SLA, Hyde again contacted the FBI, and 2 men came to question him. In a letter to his San Jose attorney, Elliot Daum, the convict described what happened. The day after I talked to FBI agents, I was taken to segregation, O-wing, the whole. It has been decided I know too much and must be silenced. Congressman Ron Dellums was notified of Hyde's plight, and his intervention may have helped get Hyde out of segregation. Perhaps the most fascinating of all the witnesses we found was Wayne Lewis, a former FBI undercover agent. He contacted me through his attorney, and when we met, he produced letters from both FBI Director Clarence Kelly and Assistant Director William A. Sullivan, confirming that he'd been a Bureau employee. I obtained a statement from Wayne Lewis that he was prepared to testify in court to the following. 1. He had been in contact with Sin K several times after the Patty Hearst kidnapping, in the role of an informant operating under orders from the FBI's Los Angeles office. 2. He said he was told that DeFries was an FBI informant who had gotten out of hand and needed to be removed. 3. He said he was asked to take Sin K's place after he'd been eliminated. Early on in our investigation, we were retained by Dr. Peter Wolf, father of Willie, or Cujo, as he was known to the media. Dr. Wolf wanted to know what happened to his idealistic son. He knew for sure the authorities weren't being straightforward. I felt a good deal of compassion for this decent man who assured me he only wanted the truth, and I did my best to give it to him. With Dr. Wolf's blessing, our committee spent many months trying to bring our findings to the public's attention. We held numerous press conferences, spoke at dozens of universities, held teach-ins and seminars. What we asked for, pleaded for, was a genuine official investigation that would root out the truth. We got an investigation, all right. The government investigated us. Elizabeth, Luke III, and I were followed 24 hours a day. Our phone was tapped, our mail tampered with, a helicopter hovered over our home. There were times I felt like stepping outside and shooting it down. So that's the end of that chapter. That was, again, Vegas PI, The Life and Times of America's Greatest Detective, Lake Headley, written by William Hoffman. But that's the first kind of person story of somebody who was there investigated. Lake Headley had a really good reputation too. So I think I'll call it quits. I think that's part 2. I guess we'll do a part 3. I got a lot more information, but from Patty Hearst herself. So thank you for listening.